right, guys, we gotta be smarter about what we bite on, okay? I want everyone to go outside. We're gonna run Red Rover on 3.
What about you, Tony?
I'm gonna run around in circles, flatten my arms, and make engine noises like this.
When it comes to playing, we kids are the pros.
We're eating right, too.
We fuel up.
To play 60!
Your school doesn't have a program? Be a leader. Start one.
Click today and join the movement.
Welcome to this edition of Lancaster Perspective. I'm Mike Miller, and my special guest from the Department of Job and Family Services, Corey Clark, the Director of Child Support Enforcement Agency, and Patrick Welsh, the Director of Operations for CSEA. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Mike. Nice to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Glad you guys could be here. We're all ready for Christmas, right? We're all ready to go?
We're getting there.
Well, I just want to make sure.
I'll check with my wife.
That's what I was talking to someone in the office, and they asked me if I was ready. I said, yeah. They said, you got everything wrapped? And I said, you have to wrap stuff? So anyway.
It's just a formality.
Just a formality, that's all it is. Let's talk a little bit about Child Support Enforcement Agency. I'm sure people don't know a lot about it. Just talk a little bit about what CSA does and how you guys are involved with it.
Sure. Well, like you said, if you don't have a case with the Child Support Agency or you don't know somebody necessarily who does, a lot of people don't know about the agency or make assumptions about what we might do. A lot of times people will get us confused with Child Protective Services, which is a different department entirely. But Child Support Enforcement Agency, as you might guess, our main role is to enforce child support. So child support payments that are made by a non-custodial parent to a custodial parent. In Ohio, the law is that all of those payments have to come through our agency. They can't be paid directly from parent to parent. So our agency is responsible for processing those payments and also for enforcing cases where the payments aren't coming in as they were ordered. So from a federal perspective, our responsibilities are to establish paternity, establish support, both child support and medical support, to enforce those support orders, to modify those support orders, and to emancipate, to terminate those orders at the end is another investigation that we do at the end to terminate those support orders. So those are our responsibilities under the federal government and the act that created our agency.
Now, and when you talk about cases, how many cases are there in Fairfield County?
10,000 cases in Fairfield County.
Wow.
So I'll tell people, when you think about a program that touches a lot of lives in the community, if you figure 10,000 cases, that's at least two. There's two parents or two parties on each of those cases, which takes you up to 20,000. Then if you figure 2.2 children per average per case, then you're looking at about 40,000 people in Fairfield County. You compare that to the population, and that's a pretty significant portion of the population that's impacted by our agency. It's the department, it's the public service that impacts more people than any other public service other than public education.
Now, Patrick, you have a legal background. You're an attorney.
Yeah.
When you talk about all these cases, how do you handle all these? I mean, take us through when somebody comes in the first time to see you. Take us through that.
Well, thankfully, of the 10,000 cases, a lot of those cases we don't have much interaction with because those are cases they're good cases. Mm-hmm. The non-custodial parent is making payments, and they require very little work on our part. So when we say 10,000 cases, certainly we manage those 10,000 cases, but actually our physical involvement is much less than that. And when they see me, my involvement in the case is more from the establishment of support and the enforcement of support side. And for instance, we schedule hearings a couple days a week just to establish child support and paternity. So when they come see us, that generally means that it hasn't worked out administratively, because before we establish child support and paternity through the court level, we try to handle it administratively. But that's a voluntary process. The parties both have to appear. They both have to submit to genetic testing if we need paternity established, and they both need to agree to a child support order. So those are obviously a lot of things to agree with, and some of the parties do. But if they don't, that's when the court gets involved. That's when we'll file a complaint with the court, and that's when they would see a CSEA attorney like myself, and we would appear at the hearing, and we would try to resolve it amicably between the parties and function sort of as a mediator and try to come to an agreed upon resolution. Because sometimes the court hearing is the first time the parties actually both
Right.
appear, and they actually would have agreed, but they just didn't appear. And if there's disagreement about how to handle it, that's when we go on the record with a formal court hearing. And in that instance, we don't represent either party. We just sort of explain the facts of the case and let the court make a decision.
Who determines how much is owed by who? I mean, who determines that? Is that you, or is that somebody else? Or
You know, in Ohio, we use a software program in our county called SupportWorks, but the Ohio Child Support guidelines are what these software programs are based on, and what it is, it's a mathematical formula that's plugged into a software program, and really it takes into account parties' incomes, the number of children they have, whether they pay for other support, whether they receive other child support, whether they have any necessary work expenses like union dues, what they pay to insure their child if they provide insurance. All those things are factored in to determine the amount of child support to be paid.
so when you add all this all together and you collect the money, where does the money go? Does that, I mean, where does that go to?
It depends on who the child resides with. It goes to the custodial parent. And as Patrick said, the guidelines are an equation. It's a mathematical formula, and the goal of that formula is to determine how much money would be spent on that child's needs: clothing, shelter, food, sports activities, extracurricular activities, all the things, a portion of the rent, a portion of the car payment, a portion of the gas, utilities, all of those things together. And if the parents were still living together in one household, what would be that child's standard of living? So the goal is to determine what the standard of living would be for that child if the parents were still together, and then to take a percentage of the non-custodial parents' earnings to provide that level of support.
No, obviously there's going to be disagreements on, well, I want this much money, you're only going to get this much money. Does that go back to you, Patrick, or is there an arbitrator, or how's that?
Yeah, typically what we'll do if there's a disagreement about that is I'll try to talk to the parties. And again, we don't take sides because we don't legally represent either party. But we will try to get the parties to talk about it and try to reach an agreement. Because if they can reach an agreement prior to a court hearing and prior to a magistrate telling them what their support's going to be, generally you have a better result because you're more invested. You've actually participated in getting to the result. And you're not relying on the court just to issue a decision that, frankly, you lose control of. So we do work with them to try to come to an agreement. But you know, in a lot of these cases, particularly with establishment of support cases, the numbers are the numbers. So if there is disagreement, you know, when we go on the record with a formal court hearing, generally the court's not going to disagree a lot with what we've already talked about because, again, it's a mathematical formula. Now, should the parties agree to deviate from what that formula says support can be, they do have that option, and you can deviate child support, again, by agreement of the parties, but the court would have to find that for some reason that's in the best interest of the minor child. And an instance would be if a non-custodial parent has to spend a significant amount of time coming to visit the child and they see the child on a regular basis if they live out of town, that might be a reason for a deviation, but there's a myriad of reasons.
How do you enforce child support? I mean, how is that done?
Well, I can talk about some of the administrative enforcement techniques, and then Patrick can jump in on the judicial enforcement techniques. Our case managers, you start out at the beginning of the case, and when there starts to be non-compliance, you kind of start out slow and then you build up in the enforcement technique. So you start out with a wage withholding order, which is a requirement anyways, but a wage withholding order goes into effect through their employer, and then the payments come directly out of their check, the same as union dues or health insurance or taxes come out of the check. Your child support comes out at that same time, and then it's sent to us. So that's a wage withholding order. We can intercept tax returns, both state and federal tax returns. We can suspend driver's license, professional license, and even recreational license, hunting license, fishing license, trapping and boating are the other two. Can suspend any of those recreational licenses. We can do what's called a financial institution data match, which is we can freeze and seize a bank account. Our system interfaces with the financial systems, and so if you have a savings account, a checking account, any type of investment, we basically get notice of that if you're in default of your child support payment, and tells us, you know, Mike Miller has a checking account with $400 in it at this bank, and we send a directive to that bank to send us that money. All of these things come into play once somebody is in default of their child support order, which means they owe they're more than 1 month's obligation behind. Beyond those things, we also have the judicial enforcement, and I'll pass that over to Patrick.
Sure. Yeah, when an attorney like myself would get involved in the case, as Corey mentioned, would be when our administrative tools that were just talked about, when they've failed and we haven't seen compliance as a result. So in that instance, we can file both civilly and criminally. Typically, we'll start the judicial and the court enforcement process with a civil filing. It's a contempt of court, and it's a basic contempt of court for not paying as ordered. If you're found in contempt for not meeting your monthly obligation, you can be sentenced to up to 30 days of incarceration for a first contempt. Legally, that jail time has to be suspended, and you have to be given the opportunity to purge the sentence or become compliant. And the matter is generally set for what's called a purge hearing a few months later, back in front of the magistrate. And if the party does pay as ordered between the hearings, or seem like they're on the right track, things have improved, the court could purge the days, basically erase the jail time, dismiss the case. If they don't purge the days, we can then file a motion with the court to impose those days, and that would be in front of a judge. And again, if the party is not compliant by the time they reach the judge does have the discretion to impose some or all of the jail time if he or she thinks it's appropriate.
Is there ever a point in time where you've been in one of these cases and you just think to yourself, wow, this affects me. I mean, personally, does that come across? I mean, is that a...
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I mean, this is an emotional situation where we're talking about families, and one thing that's always a distinction is when we're at the court level, we're only handling child support, and that's all that our agency, that's all that we have a contract to enforce. So our hearings are limited in scope to that. But typically these parties' issues far exceed that. There's generally issues regarding visitation, and some of the parents have legitimate legal issues that are tied into support. For instance, a party may not want to pay child support because perhaps they're not able to see the child as legally they're entitled to. And oftentimes they want to see those things resolved together. And we have to explain to them quite often that legally we don't have the capability to do that. The court can only hear what's before the court, and that's our motion to enforce the order. So legally these are separate actions, and that's always a difficult discussion because the parties are there, the issues are kind of tied together. So we encounter that a lot, and that tends to bring up some emotions, certainly.
I know there's a state organization that you're involved with, Corey. Do you guys get together and talk about how to handle? I mean, guidelines, those type things. Yeah,
there's what's called the Ohio Child Support Directors Association, or the OCDA, and that is made up of the child support directors for all 88 counties. And we do just as you mentioned. We get together on a quarterly basis, and we discuss current topics, changes in the law, how is this county handling this particular issue. Anytime you have things that come up in the course of a case and enforcing a case and you haven't come across it before and maybe you're a little bit unsure how to handle it, those are times when a lot of times you would communicate with some of the other counties to say, hey, have you experienced this situation, and how have you addressed it?
One of the things that I was asked was Fairfield County, because you handle cases from other counties, don't you, that come into Fairfield County? Is that a fair? I mean, how does that work? Is that can they ask to come to Fairfield County, or do they have to reside in Fairfield County? You
have to reside in Fairfield County, receive benefits in Fairfield County, or your initial court order. So if you're divorced in Fairfield County, if that's how the case started, however it was introduced to court, that court's going to retain jurisdiction over the children and the family. So subsequent court actions would come through us, even if the parties do move. And again, if they're receiving some sort of assistance that mandates we get involved through our county, which means that they would reside there, then we would be involved in those cases as well. The parties can have the case moved to another county. That is rare, and that's really something our agency isn't involved in. Sometimes you do have parties who both do move to Franklin County, and it's just more convenient for them to have it addressed there. And they would have to file a motion themselves with the court to move that hearing, and then the courts would have to communicate with one another, and Franklin County would have to assume jurisdiction. So there is a legal process involved, and sometimes all the steps that are required there aren't met. So generally, it does stay where it originates.
And we've talked about a lot of different procedures and state procedures and our procedures. There's something that you would change if somebody came to you right now and said, okay, you can change one thing about child support enforcement. What would you? I mean, throughout the state, not just Fairfield County, but maybe something that you just, oh, this isn't right. I mean, just. Sure.
Oh, we could probably draw up a pretty long list for that. But I would say for me, and I think this is probably individual to various people who work in child support. Everybody probably has a particular area that may bother them more than others. But for me, I find frustration in when we have customers, because this happens as a very common issue, when we have the non-custodial parent say, why can't you do anything to get me visitation or to get the visitation that's been ordered for me? You come to me, you take my taxes, you take my, you're sending me letters telling me that you're going to put me in jail if I miss a child support payment. But when I don't get to see my kids, when the visitation order isn't filed, nobody cares about that. And to an extent, they're right about that, because our agency doesn't have any jurisdiction over visitation enforcement. So there's a whole agency, county level, state level, federal level, set up to enforce child support orders, but there's nothing for visitation orders, for enforcement of visitation orders, other than for them to hire an attorney and go to court to address that situation, or to try to file and to file that contempt motion on their own. Most people don't feel comfortable or don't feel that they would have the knowledge or skill to be able to do it on their own, and most time they don't have the money to pay for an attorney to file that on their behalf, so they feel as though they're kind of stuck by themselves. Meanwhile, we're here to enforce the child support. So I do understand that frustration. It's a frustration for me, because I have to tell them that there's nothing we can do about it. So I would like to see that addressed in some way.
Patrick, anything you would?
I suppose mine would be more of a personal issue with that we as attorneys face. But what we encounter frequently in court enforcement hearings is we encounter a non-custodial parent who's not paying support, largely because they may be incapable of working. And that's apparent just in meeting them and talking to them for a few minutes, that they may have some mental or physical disability that is yet undiagnosed. And legally, we still need to enforce that case because they still have an obligation to pay. And legally, we have to enforce that case until they provide some documentation indicating that they do have a mental or physical incapacity that prevents them from working. And that process to actually have that documented and validated by Social Security is a long process. So it results in cases that sort of remain in limbo while we wait for that finding one way or another. And typically, you've got parties who will perhaps apply for disability and not make payments under the assumption that they're going to be found disabled retroactively, and sometimes that doesn't happen, and so you have a reliance on that party's part that that's going to happen. It doesn't happen. It leaves cases lingering out there in limbo for a long period of time, which causes problems for enforcement, because the courts don't know what to do with those.
When people ask about information, how can they access their case? I mean, can either the custodial or non-custodial, is the information shared? Talk a little bit about how they can access their information.
Sure. Well, obviously the customer is welcome to come into our agency and talk to a case manager or a staff member personally and ask questions regarding their case. Also via phone or email. So those are the traditional ways in which they can access case information. But the program that we're really excited about is the web portal program, and that's an application, a web-based application from the Ohio Office of Child Support that will enable customers to access their case-specific information online 24 hours a day, remotely from their own home. So that's recently been activated, and we're currently in the process of making customers aware of that, and we have more customers enrolling every day. It enables customers, one, to view their own contact information, and also provide us updated contact information, such as their address, their phone number, their email, ways that we need, information we need to keep them updated on the situation. It also lets them view a payment history of their case. So if they have a child support case, it lets them view a payment history for the past 2 years. And it also has a message center component to it, which lets them have questions addressed that may not have otherwise been specifically addressed by the web portal. So they can ask anything they want in this message center. If it's something about why didn't I receive a payment, or why aren't you enforcing my case, and then we can answer them via the web portal also. So it's going to enable customers to access their information a lot more remotely. It's going to be more accessible. It's going to be more comprehensive, and also requiring us to, have fewer man hours
Sure.
involved in handling the cases.
And I'm sure there's transport, people coming in can't get into the building or can't be there. I mean, that's, because do they have to come in with this web portal? I mean, is that?
They don't have to come in. I mean, again, it's accessible online, so
Okay.
if they have computer access, they're going to be able to access the web portal. And I think what some of the things we'd like to do down the road are perhaps have that web portal address linked to publicly accessible computers and government buildings, libraries, so the people who might not have their own internet access
Sure.
can access it there, and maybe make the local attorneys aware of that as well if they have a case with a client of theirs that has a child support case, and they can access the information while visiting with their own attorney.
Oh, that
So
sounds like a great
That
idea.
could prove helpful too.
And this is just brand new? This just came out? This
Yes.
is fantastic. I know we've got, there's a lot of different programs that are in child support. Are there any new ones coming out right now, Corey? Is there anything?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we were recently approved for a federal grant, and at the visitation issue that I talked about a couple minutes ago, this is actually kind of in line with that. The grant is called Parenting Time Opportunity for Children, or PTOC, as it were. And that program the purpose of that program is for us to be able to establish parenting time orders or visitation orders at the same time that we establish child support orders. So currently, we have an administrative process where the parties come in, we run those guidelines and say this is the amount that the child support should be. If they agree to it, they sign off on that, we file it into court, and that's their child support amount. We don't address visitation at that time because it's not part of our jurisdiction. This grant, the federal office gave us this grant and said, as a pilot project, we want you to go ahead and address that visitation at that time. So what we're doing, or what we're going to be doing here very soon when we implement the services, is that we will, at that same time when we're doing the child support, we will say, our local court has a visitation schedule. It's called Rule 17, and it's your standard visitation schedule, which is every other weekend, Wednesday evenings, alternating holidays, 2 weeks in the summer, that type of a thing.
Now, can those be adjusted? I mean, can that schedule be by either party if they?
It can be adjusted if they agree on the adjustment, not through this program,
Right.
but typically through court, or the judge can change that as the judge sees fit. But through us, it would be that standard schedule. If they both agree to that, then we include that in their order for support, file it into court, and they now have an order for visitation, same as they have an order for support. So it's a program that we're excited about because it's going to be able to impact a lot of people who their only other recourse, and I should say this is for never married parties. This is for parties who've never been married and they have a child together, because if they have been married, then they're going to have to go,
Right.
they're going through a divorce process or a dissolution process. This is for the never married parties. So it's going to be able to establish those orders, whereas otherwise they would leave, they would have an order for support, they would have no order for visitation, so there would be no legal right to visitation for that non-custodial parent. So this is a program that we're excited about, and we think it can impact a lot of folks in our community.
If people had questions, website, phone numbers, what's the easiest way to get a hold of either one of you?
I would say Pat's direct phone line is probably the best.
I do have a number that's really easy to remember. I think it used to be a pizza shop. So
The agency website is www.fcjfs.org, and that website has our department, has CSEA on it, as well as the other departments within Job and Family Services. Has all the contact information for the various programs that they may be interested in. It has some basic information, general information about various services that the Child Support Agency has available. So that would probably be the first step. They also, for the web portal, you can get that through the state website, Office of Child Support website. I would say the best way to do that. They didn't make it easy. They didn't give it a catchy. They didn't give it a catchy web address so you can get right to it. But what you do is you go to the Ohio Office of Child Support website, and then it's a link from that page to the web portal. So if you just Google Ohio Office of Child Support, it'll take you right to their site, and then there's a link on there to the web portal where they can sign up and then view all of that information.
Now, if people have never been through this, their first time, is there like an orientation process, or they just come in and you guys talk to them then? Or?
I mean, typically when a case begins, they're going to go through a formal intake process, we call
okay.
it. That's when they sign up for 4D services. They're requesting child support become involved in their lives in some capacity, whether it's to establish support or paternity. During that process, they're going to have to fill out the application, but they'll also meet with an intake caseworker who will answer some of the questions that they have and provide a general overview, certainly.
So in that initial time, they're talking an hour, maybe an hour and a half, or that long, or maybe a little bit longer? Just
Yeah, I think it's sort of case specific. If someone has a series of questions, we have staff members who will take as much time with them as they need, and they don't need an appointment. They can just
just come in. Okay.
Yeah, we'll page someone. We call it a walk-in, and someone will go and address the customer right away.
Just real quickly, in addition to Patrick, there are two other attorneys,
Two other attorneys.
And then your case staff, which has supervisors and case managers. And we've just got a few minutes left, and I appreciate both of you coming in and talking about all the different responsibilities for Child Support Enforcement Agency. And I know you guys are big rivals. I know that there's a lot that goes on. It's been pretty calm today, but Browns and Steelers, I got to bring it up. I'm sorry, I got to bring it up.
Mike, I don't know if you can call it a rivalry anymore. The Steelers have won, I think 21 out of the last 23 games. So I almost feel sorry for them at this point.
I mean, that's true. I can't really argue that.
That's true.
I mean,
a lawyer is speechless.
I will say that you probably never heard this before, but before they called it the Super Bowl, the Browns won the championship every other year for about 10 years in the 50s. It was before I was born.
Leather helmets.
The Browns fans root for the draft every year. 4 or 5 games in, we're ready for the draft. So one of these days.
The predictions on let's see, are the Steelers, are they both out of the playoffs?
The Steelers are still mathematically
I just
eligible.
wondered, that's all.
Might be a long shot, but we do get to square off the last game of the season.
Oh, now is that in Pittsburgh or in Cleveland?
I think it's in Pittsburgh.
It is in Pittsburgh because the first one was in Cleveland,
so
right?
If the Browns knock them off there, then mission
that
accomplished.
pretty much is the Super Bowl.
That is the Super Bowl
Sadly,
for them. Well, that's again, we appreciate both of you coming in, and we wish you the best over the holidays. And again, good luck with the Browns and the Steelers. And that's again, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Mike's Perspective. I'm Mike Miller. Until we meet again, let's make a difference.
Explore new worlds. Read. Visit literacy.gov and let the journey begin.